Okay. Now it's really okay. So, so you had your first opportunity to get your feet wet in the belief template. So, what? First of all, what questions do you have about the process of it? Yes, Jim.
I really got confused when I went into the enablement. I got confused when it came to addressing the enabling box. I was just sort of like, felt like I was swimming and didn't have a very good handle on it.
Well, what happened in a couple of the groups that I visited, one of the things that happens, and this is typical when you ask for the enabling cause effect, is that people will launch into describing their strategy. Because that's probably what happened.
No, I didn't. I knew that was later, but I didn't know. So if I would strategy, what I would do.
Yeah, you're not supposed to be talking about that yet. Didn't you read the materials? Yeah. When you ask somebody, okay, what leads to or makes it possible, or what needs to be there so that, for instance, in this case, students can feel comfortable, the form of the question can easily take people to their strategy. What makes it possible? Oh, well, I do this, and then I do this, and I think this, and I make this happen. And they start giving you all of their strategy stuff. Now, this takes us to an absolutely essential point that is important not just for the array, the belief template, but for gathering information in general, which is that there is no magic in any of the elicitation questions. They are not magic questions. The sheets that I gave you with the elicitation questions, those are great questions. They're excellent questions. They've been honed upon the whetstone of many years of many seminars and work with people. Nevertheless, they're still pretty blunt instruments. And they cannot be depended upon to provide the answer. So just because you're asking that very good enabling cause-effect question, it doesn't mean that that person is going to answer it with the information that you want. They're going to respond however they respond to it. And that's true with any question that you ask in gathering information with somebody. So what that means is, for us as modelers, is that we can't depend on the question. What we have to depend on is our understanding of the distinction that we're trying to find. Right, exactly. At this point, you're still becoming familiar with what these things are, how to recognize them, what they feel like, taste like, look like, smell like. And you're starting to get that. You are starting to get, well, wait a minute, I asked for this enabling cause effect, and I'm getting all this other stuff, and it doesn't seem right. Well, that's good. Trust that feeling. It's not. What the enabling cause, first of all, one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about the belief template and the enabling cause effects, criteria, definition, motivating cause effect, these are beliefs, these are abstractions. So if people start telling you just exactly what they do, well, those aren't really abstractions, are they? And that's an indication that, well, wait a minute, maybe they're not at the level of experience that we want to be talking about. So one of the common things that can happen when you ask for enabling cause effect is that people start giving you their strategy. So just be aware of that, telling you what they do. Another thing that can happen is and this happened in another group that I was in, she asked for the definition. What do you mean by people being relaxed? And instead of getting a definition as an abstraction level description, started getting the evidence, and that's another common thing that will happen. You ask for, well, what is this? Or what do you mean by this? And the person starts describing the actual things that they see, hear, and feel that let them know when it's there. So that's another common thing that can happen. So I think you will find, I know you will find that as you continue to use these and struggle with them, get more and more examples of them under your belt and in your brain and chest, that you will start to be able to recognize, what they are, what they look and feel and sound like, so that you'll be able to start separating out when somebody is telling you one thing and not the other. Now, one of the things that makes this even, that made this first foray into the belief template, well, that's a pretty good word, isn't it? Foray. I like that. This first foray into the belief template, more difficult than it will be in the future, is that we haven't done the rest of the array. So, people just have their experience. They don't have all these little boxes inside of them. Nobody's got these boxes in them. Nobody. Nobody's got these lines. Nobody's got these boxes. These are distinctions that we are creating to help bring some kind of structure to what is really going on inside of people, which is this. Yeah, that's the way it really is. And after the experiences you just had gathering information, you can confirm that it's just like that, only in 3D, right? So, in fact, experience is really much more like that. And we're saying, okay, now we want to do what this person does. Well, how do you get into that? How do you connect with that? How do you take, this basically infinitely complex, infinitely layered thing called experience and try and make sense out of it enough that you can take it on? Well, what we do is we say, okay, that infinite complexity is something we can't encompass. What we need to do is establish a certain set of distinctions, if you like, filters that we're going to apply to that. And so what we say is, okay, we're going to take that mass of experience and we're going to look at it through the filter, through the lens of external behavior. And when we do that, these are the things that stand out. These are the things that we see in there. And then we're going to look at it through this set of filters of strategies. And then we get these nodal points, these essential points stand out. And then we're going to look at it through that of emotions, and then we get this one right here. And then we look at it through the filters of beliefs, and in the distinctions we're using, criteria and evidence and motivating cause effect, and we get these connections here. And what we're looking for, the reason that we're pulling out those distinctions is we're saying that by pulling out just those distinctions, we have identified those points of interaction in this infinite complexity that give rise to most of that complexity, that generate most of that complexity. So instead of trying to generate all that, reproduce all that complexity, we're just going to pull out, this structure, and that's something we can handle, we can take on. And the idea is that if we take on that structure, we can start generating our own infinite complexity from it. Does that help a little bit? So tomorrow, by the end of tomorrow, we will have finished out the array, and you will have a better understanding of what strategies are, what emotions are, what external behaviors are, And then when you sit down to start gathering information from somebody, regardless of what you ask them about so what's important to you when you are, training for a bicycle race, what's important to you when you're training for a bicycle race, and this person says to you, well, I start thinking about what it is I want to accomplish ultimately, and then I compare that to what I have done in the past, and then I start thinking about the steps that I need to do to get there. What is he telling you about? Strategy. So now you can go, okay, this person I don't have to stay in beliefs now because I've got the whole array at my disposal. He's telling me about his strategies. So one choice you will have then is to move right to there and go, okay, he's in his strategies, let's talk about strategies. And go and do his strategies. Exhaust him. Just run that tape out of him until he's done with his strategies. Okay, he's got that off his chest. But it's a good thing because now, once it's out, now you can know that that's it. And when when you go to gather beliefs and they start talking about that, you'll already know, oh, you know what? We've done that. And it'll be easier for you and that person to get back to where you want to be because it's clear you've already talked about strategies. So one choice will be just to go, that's where they're going, let's find out about it. You can ask them about what's important to you, and instead they say, when you're training for a race, and he said, well, there's just this sense of deep competitiveness in me. Well, he's talking about his feelings. He's probably telling you about what we're going to find out tomorrow is a sustaining emotion. Okay. Oh my God.
We got there.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, undoubtedly, when you started asking your partner to describe their experience, in fact, when you were having them describe their 3 examples, they probably gave you almost everything in all those 3 examples. They were probably talking about, their criteria, their cause effects, their strategies, what they were feeling, their behaviors. You were getting at least some in all of these, okay? So I think you'll find that once you have the whole array at your disposal, it will be less complex and less confusing because instead of having to try and fit something that doesn't work into those little boxes, you'll have some place to put it. And you'll be free to do it. You'll be free to move into that other place. Freedom is good. Who said that? You did, right? Now, why is that great? Why am I responding to that? Why is Diane responding to that? So she's over there mumbling, oh, freedom is good. She had to say that. You know why? Because when Diane was getting out her belief template, one of the features in there, one of the important distinctions for Anwar is freedom. That's part of who she is. So she will have to respond to that. She can't help. She might keep from saying something about it, but inside her little heart's going, freedom, freedom. You see? Okay, all right. Let me tell you a story and we'll call it a night, yeah? Okay. Good. Oh, before we do, however, actually, do you want to you have some announcements to make, right? Why don't we do that first? And, okay. Yeah. Well, I'm up in the mountains now, but I haven't always been up in the mountains. When I was a kid, I never went up in the mountains. I grew up in Los Angeles, in a suburb of Los Angeles. It was flat. And then I went off to school, went off to college, and had a roommate, and the Vietnam War was on. And we took our draft cards and we tore them up and put them in an envelope and mailed them to the President of the United States. And after we mailed them off, we started thinking about it and started thinking, well, maybe it's not a good idea to stay at home. Maybe we ought to leave for a while. And so the question was, where to go? Where should we go? And Steve, my roommate, he said, well, let's go backpacking up in the mountains. I've never been backpacking up in the mountains. He said, oh, well, I've got to take you. You got to go. And he started telling me about, filling my head with these fabulous images of being up in these beautiful mountains with these boulders made of granite, sunsets and sunrises and great big pine trees and bears and all kinds of wonderful things. And he just, crystal clear streams, and it sounded wonderful. I said, oh, well, let's go. I want to go backpacking. He said, well, I know just how we'll start our trip. He said, I know this place on the crest of the Sierra Nevada mountains that we can hike up to in one day from the east side of the Sierras. And when we get up to that peak, we'll be able to see for hundreds of miles into the east and hundreds of miles into the west, almost all the way to the California, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And I said, I'm in, let's go. He said, all right, well, you're going to need equipment. All right. So he took me to a camping store, backpacking store, and I had one hell of a great time going through that store, buying my first backpack and a sleeping bag and a pad and hiking boots, real hiking boots, big soles on them, and a backpack stove and my own tent. Just all this great gear, snake bite kit. And took all that stuff home and laid it all out on the floor and just had a wonderful time, gazing at it, thinking, wow, I'm the total backpacker. I got everything I need right here. So that night we packed up our packs. I packed up my pack, and I was going to be gone for several weeks, so I took several changes of clothing, and I like to read, so I took 3 books, including 2 hardback books. And I liked oranges, so I took 5 pounds of oranges, and I took a glass jar of peanut butter, and I took my 35 millimeter camera, which is not the way cameras are these days. It was just like this rock with a piece of glass in front of it. And by the time my pack was filled, it weighed about 65, 70 pounds. And the next morning, we put it on. We put on our packs, and a picture was taken of me and Steven, and Steve is standing there next to me in his pack, and I'm standing next to him like this in my pack because it's heavy. So we drive to the east side of the Sierras, and by the time we got to the trailhead, it was too late in the day to start the hiking. And so we camped that night at the base, at the trail base. And was it a great night, Built my first campfire and set up my tent, my sleeping bag, got out my little stove, made my first little backpack meal on my stove, and I was very happy. Went to sleep that night, excited, woke up, crack of dawn next morning, and got out, brisk and cold, and I made a little fire. Steve was still sleeping. And I put away my tent and rolled up my sleeping bag, and Steve was still sleeping. And I made myself breakfast, and Steve is still sleeping. And I'm starting to get kind of annoyed with Steve, I thought he was supposed to be a real backpacker, and here he is sleeping the morning away. And then I start making lots of noise around camp, and it doesn't do any good. He's just snoring away. And I'm thinking, oh, shit, I could be in trouble here. I'm now saddled with Steve. I'm going up backpacking in the mountains. Here I am, the total backpacker, and this guy who's supposed to know what he's doing, he can't even get out of the sleeping bag in the morning, So I started to think I may have trouble with Steve on the trail. So finally I decided I can't put up with this any longer. I went over and started kicking him, Get up, Steve, we got to get on the trail, get up. So he looked up and he finally pulled himself out of the bag, and he had a little breakfast, put his stuff together, and I'm sitting there waiting. Finally, he puts on his pack. I put on my pack, and we start up the trail. Up the trail, and we're going to have dinner on the crest of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I said, don't worry, I'll take the lead. And I started up the trail. Okay? Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the Sierra Nevada mountains, or California for that matter. But the way it works is, here's the Pacific Ocean, here. And then there's the Coast Range. Then there's the valley. And then there's the foothills of the Sierras. And then it goes up and 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 up to the Sierra Nevada. This is the west side. The east side, it does this. That's Nevada. This is where we were. And that's where we were going. Now, the way you go up that is on something called switchbacks. The trail goes up for a little ways in that direction, 50 yards, 60, 70 yards, and then it turns and comes back and goes 50, 60 yards that way, and then it goes back up this way, and this way, and this way. Forever. It's just forever. So I'm starting up the trail. And at first, of course, I'm just thrilled and happy, and I'm trucking along. But after not too many switchbacks, I start getting tired. I'm carrying a lot of weight. It's heavy. And pretty soon, I'm not just trucking up the trail, I'm trudging up the trail. And I'm starting to drag, and I'm getting tired. But I don't want Steve to know that. And so pretty soon, I start discovering really incredible trees that we just need to stop and look at. Steve, look at that tree. No, look at it some more. And then I'd find a really incredible squirrel and an amazing pine cone that we'd have to stop and look at. And then after a while, I couldn't do that either. I was tired. And I'd get up to the end of a switchback, and I'd just say, I have to stop and rest. And I'd lean back up against something, and I'd rest until I felt my legs stop trembling. And I'd get on the trail, and I'd just walk up to the end of the next switchback, and I'd have to stop and rest again. And about that time, I'm starting, these voices start going off in my head. Voices that are saying things like, what the hell are you doing here? Are you out of your minds? You're killing yourselves. This is crazy. What are you doing? This is too much. I'm going, what? I could be home watching television. That's what I kept saying to myself. I could be home watching television. What am I doing up here? Why, so I can have dinner on the crest of the Sierra Nevada mountain? This is nuts. I can't make it. But then I'd get up and start up the next switchback. But each switchback got longer and longer. My legs were trembling. And after a while, the voice started to change in my head. And it started to go, you can't make it. You just can't make it. And that lasted for about 2 or 3 switchbacks. And then finally I got to the end of one switchback, and I knew I couldn't make it. And I stopped. And at the moment I realized that I just couldn't go any further, I started to cry. And Steve looked at me and he said, I couldn't help but notice that you're crying. What's the matter? And I said, Steve, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I can't go any further. This is too hard for me. I'm going to have to go back down. Go on if you want to, but I have to go back down. I just can't make it. Steve said, well, I'm sorry to hear that too. But I do have a suggestion for you. I said, well, what? He said, I've been following you on the trail for quite a while now. I'm watching you, watching how you walk. So? He said, well, you don't walk right. And then the thought hit me, oh my God, I'm halfway up a mountain with a crazy man. The altitude has done something to him, I said, what are you talking about? I don't know how to walk. He said, you don't know how to walk. You're walking like you're still in the city. You're not. You're up in the mountains. I said, well, what are you talking about? How many different ways are there to walk? He said, well, when you're walking, you're just flopping one foot down in front of the other, like you're on a sidewalk. But you're not. You're up in the mountains now. He said, there's all kinds of things in the trail. There's roots, and there's ruts, and there's rocks, and you're stepping on every one of them. He said, when you walk in the trails in the mountains, instead of just flopping your foot down, you need to think about where you're going to place your foot, and then you place it there. Then you think about where you're going to put your next step, and you place it there. Think about where you're going to put your next step, and you place it there. And I said, you're crazy. That's more work than what I've been doing. Steve said, well, maybe so, but I'm not the one standing here crying. And I had to admit he was right about that. So I said, well, okay, I'll try it for one switchback. So I got my pack back on my shoulders and started back up the trail. Only this time, instead of just flopping one foot down in front of the other, I looked to see where I was going to place my foot, and I saw there was a rock there that I was going to put my foot on. Instead of stepping on the rock, I stepped next to it. And then I took my next step, and I saw that there was a rut. Instead of stepping into it, I stepped beside it. And then there was a root. Instead of stepping on the root, I stepped over it. And I kept looking and deciding where I was going to place each step, and stepped and stepped and stepped. And suddenly, I was at the end of the switchback. And I felt okay. So I turned, and paying attention to where I was placing my feet, I walked up the next switchback. And that night, I had dinner on the crest of the Sierra Nevada mountains. That's how you do it. So see you in the morning at 9 o'clock. Have a good evening.